Armored warfare in North Africa in 1940 to 43 was heavily influenced by doctrinal and technical developments that occurred in the interwar period following the end of the First World War. Tank technology revolved around three core functions: mobility, protection, and firepower, and in order to build effective tanks, a balance had to be achieved between these functions. However, tanks were still very much cutting-edge technology in the period 1919 to 39, and the limited number of suitable engines had a major impact on the ability of armies to introduce new armored fighting vehicles. Most tanks and tankettes built prior to 1935 were powered by low-torque petrol engines which delivered no more than 80 to 90 horsepower, which limited the size and speed of tanks. Indeed, the famous Matilda II tank went to war powered by two 87-horsepower engines designed for city buses. Every tank design bureau also struggled to perfect effective transmissions and suspension systems, which slowed the creation of better armed and better protected tanks. It is also important to note that it generally required about 3 years to move from issuing a requirement for a new tank to initial production, and designs which were too conservative could become obsolete by the time they reached the field. The development of doctrine for armored warfare rested squarely on experience from the Western Front in the First World War. Both the British and French armies invested heavily in the development of tanks in order to break the stalemate of trench warfare, and their efforts paid off in 1917 to 18. Under the dynamic leadership of Brigadier Hugh J. Ells, Britain's Tank Corps quickly grew into a formidable combat force. On 20 November 1917, the first day of the Battle of Cambrai, Ells personally led the attack of 9 tank battalions, with a total of 378 tanks, which achieved an 8-kilometer-deep penetration into a well-defended section of the German-held Hindenburg Line. On 8 August 1918, on the opening day of the Battle of Amiens, the British committed 12 tank battalions with a total of 432 tanks and were able to advance up to 13 kilometers. At the Battle of Saint-Mihiel in September 1918, the newly formed U.S. Army Tank Corps successfully employed 2 battalions with 144 French-built Renault FT light tanks under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George S. Patton. In contrast, the Imperial German Army took little interest in tanks and never employed more than a dozen of its clumsy A-7V heavy tanks in a single action. Despite issues with mechanical reliability, the combat experience gained by the Allies in 1917 and 1918 demonstrated that tanks were quite effective in the infantry support role.